The doors of the Grand Assembly Hall weighed more than most human buildings. They were carved from the compressed core of a dead star, polished until they reflected the faces of those who stood before them. For 800,000 years, those doors had opened to admit the conquered, the desperate, and the doomed. Today, they opened for 7 humans who looked mildly annoyed about the whole situation. Ambassador James Hartley walked at the front of the group, his diplomatic credentials hanging from a lanyard around his neck, like he was attending a corporate conference rather than facing judgment before the rulers of 12,000 civilizations. Behind him came his team, Commander Zara Oduya of the Military Advisory Unit, Dr. Felix Romano, the physicist, Communications Officer Priya Malhotra, Engineer Samuel Beckel, Medical Officer Dr. Hannah Webb, and Security Chief Anton Volkov. The chamber stretched before them like an artificial canyon. Tiers of seats rose toward a ceiling lost in darkness, each level filled with beings that defied human imagination. Some were made of light. Others appeared to be sentient geometric shapes. A delegation of creatures resembling walking coral reefs occupied an entire section, while nearby, beings of pure sound vibrated in frequencies that made human teeth ache. 14,000 alien representatives watched in absolute silence as the humans walked down the central path. The crystalline floor beneath their feet recorded every step, storing the data for civilizations that collected history the way humans collected stamps. At the far end of the chamber, raised on a platform of floating stone, sat the 7 arbiters. These were the oldest beings in the known galaxy, entities who had watched stars being born and had grown bored of the spectacle. They appeared differently to each species that viewed them, but to human eyes, they looked like elderly judges wrapped in robes made of captured starlight. The first arbiter, a being called Eternal Voice in most translations, leaned forward on her throne. When she spoke, her words formed directly in the minds of everyone present. You are the species called human. From the planet designated Earth, you have been brought here to answer for crimes against the galactic sovereignty. James cleared his throat. With respect, we weren't brought here. We walked in on our own. A ripple of sound passed through the chamber. It took James a moment to realize it was laughter, though from species that had never evolved humor, it sounded more like grinding metal. You were captured by Imperial forces, the second arbiter corrected. His voice felt like ice forming in the brain. Your vessel was disabled and your crew taken prisoner. Our vessel is fine, Samuel called out from the back of the group. I fixed the damage your people caused while we were waiting in that holding cell. Also, I improved your cell's environmental systems. The previous design was terribly inefficient. The chamber fell silent again, but this silence had a different quality. It was the silence of 14,000 beings trying to process information that did not fit their understanding of reality. Commander Oduya stepped forward. Perhaps we should start from the beginning. 11 days ago, our experimental vessel, the Prometheus, was conducting a test flight in what we believed to be empty space. We had no knowledge of your borders, your laws, or your existence. Ignorance is not a defense, the third arbiter declared. We're not claiming ignorance as a defense, James replied. We're stating a fact. Earth has been transmitting radio signals into space for nearly 300 years. We have sent probes, satellites, and messages of peace in every direction. Not once did anyone respond. Not once did anyone warn us that we were approaching forbidden territory. He paused, letting his words settle across the assembly. So our first question, honored arbiters, is simple: why not? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A species of tall, willowy beings with silver skin exchanged rapid glances with each other. The affairs of the sovereignty are not subject to interrogation by primitive newcomers, the fourth arbiter said. But there was something uncertain in the thought voice now. Dr. Romano stepped forward, pulling a small device from his pocket. "May I present evidence? You may not bring weapons into this chamber." A voice boomed from somewhere in the upper tiers. "It's not a weapon," Felix said patiently. "It's a calculator. I want to show the assembly something interesting." Before anyone could stop him, he projected a holographic display into the air above their group. Numbers and equations spiraled outward, forming patterns that made several mathematically inclined species gasp. "This is the formula our ship used to breach what you call dimensional barriers," Felix explained. "According to every physical law recognized by the sovereignty, this equation is impossible. Matter cannot move this way. Energy cannot behave like this. And yet, here we are." He smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "In the 11 days since our capture, I've reviewed your scientific archives. Your civilization has studied physics for 3 million years. Ours has studied it for 400. But somehow, we solved something you declared unsolvable." The first arbiter's form flickered with what might have been agitation. "What is your point, human?" "My point is that you've been looking at the universe the same way for so long that you've forgotten there might be other ways to see it. You built walls around what was possible and called them laws. We built doors." James stepped forward again, his voice carrying clearly through the massive space. 11 days ago, our arrival disrupted a ceremony. We understand this caused offense. We understand that 3 patrol fleets moved to intercept us, and that those fleets experienced difficulties. You destroyed 700 vessels. Someone shouted from the galleries. We relocated them, Commander Oduya corrected. Every ship intact. Every crew member alive. They're currently in orbit around your second moon. Probably very confused, but completely unharmed. She pulled out a tablet and displayed a star map. We could have destroyed them. Dr. Romano's equations work both ways. But we chose not to. Does that sound like the action of an enemy? The 7 arbiters conferred in a language of pure thought, their conversation visible as swirling colors above their heads. The rest of the chamber watched in stunned silence. Finally, the first arbiter spoke again. "The human delegation will be held in custody while we investigate these claims." "This session is—" "No," James said simply. The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. In 800,000 years, no one had interrupted an arbiter. "We will not be held in custody," James continued. "We came here voluntarily to explain ourselves and seek peaceful relations. But we are not prisoners, and we will not be treated as such. You have no power here," the 5th arbiter warned. "You are 7 beings standing before the combined might of the galaxy." James nodded slowly. "That's true. But before you make any decisions, I think you should contact your forces near Earth." A chill passed through the chamber. "What have you done?" the first arbiter demanded. "Nothing yet. But 3 of your battlecruisers entered our solar system 2 hours ago. They've been broadcasting surrender demands to our planet." James checked his watch, a gesture so casual it bordered on insulting. "By now, our defense systems have probably activated. I would hate for there to be a misunderstanding." Priya stepped forward with a communication device. "I can establish a link if you'd like. Real-time quantum transmission. Another thing that should be impossible, according to your physics." The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over each other, demanding information, threatening retaliation, calling for calm. The arbiters pulsed with conflicting energies as they tried to restore order. Through it all, the 7 humans stood calmly in the center of the storm, waiting dot when the transmission finally connected. It showed 3 Imperial battlecruisers drifting powerless in space, their weapons offline, their engines dead. Around them, a ring of human vessels held position. The ships were small, almost primitive in appearance. but they had somehow disabled the most advanced warships in the galaxy without firing a single shot. A human voice came through the link, belonging to a woman with calm authority. "This is Admiral Rebecca Stone of Earth Defense. To the Imperial vessels, your crew is in no danger. Life support has been maintained. However, your weapons and propulsion systems have been temporarily suspended. This will be reversed once we receive confirmation that our diplomatic team is safe and free to leave." She paused, and somehow her smile was audible. "Please understand, this is not an act of war. It's a conversation starter." James turned back to the 7 arbiters, his expression pleasant. "Now then, shall we discuss peaceful relations? Or would you prefer to continue threatening us?" The first arbiter stared at the human ambassador for a long moment. Then she did something she had not done in 400,000 years. She laughed. "Very well, human. You have our attention. Let us talk." And with those words, everything changed. 3 days had passed since the confrontation in the Grand Assembly Hall, and the humans had been moved from prisoners to guests. The distinction meant better food and softer beds, but the surveillance remained constant. Every wall had sensors. Every corner hid observers. Ambassador James Hartley stood at the window of their diplomatic suite, watching vessels from 100 different species pass through the artificial sky of the sovereignty's capital station. The station itself was the size of a small moon, built around the corpse of an ancient god, or so the locals claimed. James found it easier to believe in dead gods than in the bureaucracy he had spent the last 3 days navigating. "They're stalling," Commander Oduya said, joining him at the window. "Every request for official talks gets delayed. Every question gets redirected to another department." "They're scared," James replied. "That's actually good news." In the corner of the suite, Dr. Romano had dismantled one of the alien communication devices and was now reassembling it with modifications that made it function approximately 400 times more efficiently. The local technicians had stopped trying to interfere after the 3rd attempt. When Felix had politely explained the fundamental flaws in their understanding of quantum entanglement, Priya Malhotra looked up from her own project. She had been monitoring alien communications, learning languages that humans had never heard before. Her gift for linguistics bordered on supernatural, though she insisted it was simply pattern recognition. "I've found something interesting," she announced. "There's a restricted archive. Very old, very protected. And someone has been accessing it repeatedly since we arrived." "What kind of archive?" James asked. "Historical records. Specifically, records about newly contacted species. But here's the strange part. Every mention of humanity has been classified at the highest level. We shouldn't even know we exist, according to their databases." Samuel looked up from his own work, which involved improving the suite's environmental systems purely out of boredom. "That doesn't make sense. They said they'd never encountered us before." "They lied," Priya said simply. The door chimed before anyone could respond. When it opened, a familiar figure entered. Delegate Mirith of the Vishari Collective, an amphibian species that had been surprisingly sympathetic during the assembly session. Mirith's species communicated through color changes in their translucent skin, supplemented by a mechanical voice box that converted these patterns into speech. Right now, their skin swirled with anxious purples and cautious greens. "Ambassador Hartley, I come with a warning and an offer." James gestured to a seat. "Please." Mirith settled into the chair, their webbed hands clasped together. "The arbiters have convened a private council. The conservative faction is pushing for immediate military action against Earth. They want to destroy your planet before you become a greater threat. How large is this faction?" Commander Oduya asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Large enough to matter, but not large enough to act without opposition. Mirith's colors shifted to a determined blue. There are those of us who remember what the sovereignty was supposed to be. A union of equals. A collective working toward shared prosperity. Instead, it has become an empire in all but name. Dr. Webb leaned forward. You're part of a resistance movement. Mirith's skin rippled with what might have been amusement. We prefer the term reformists, but yes. We have watched the arbiters consolidate power for millennia. We have seen species classified as primitive and denied basic rights. We have witnessed worlds stripped of resources under the guise of guidance. And you think we can help change that? James asked. I think you already have. Mirith reached into their robe and produced a small data crystal. This contains information that the arbiters have kept hidden for a very long time. Information about your species specifically. Felix took the crystal, examining it with scientific curiosity. What's on it? The truth about why no one answered your signals. The truth about why your borders were never mapped. The truth about what the sovereignty really fears. The crystal contained a single file, a record dated almost 2 centuries ago in human time measurements. The team gathered around as Felix projected its contents. The recording showed a council chamber, similar to the one they had stood in, but smaller and clearly older. A group of senior officials surrounded a display showing Earth. The familiar blue marble hanging in space. One of the officials, a tall being made of crystalline structures, spoke first. The primitive world in Sector 7 Gamma has achieved nuclear capability. Standard protocol recommends observation and eventual contact. Another official, this one resembling a mass of intelligent tentacles, responded with agitation. Standard protocol assumes rational development. These creatures achieved nuclear weapons before they achieved global unity. They used the weapons on each other. A primitive stage, the crystal being argued. Many species pass through such phases, not like this. The tentacle creature manipulated the display, showing data streams that made several officials recoil. Their rate of technological advancement is unprecedented. They developed from basic agriculture to nuclear power in less than 10,000 years. The average species takes 300,000 years to make that journey. Silence fell over the ancient council. What are you suggesting? The crystal being asked. I am suggesting we do nothing. No contact. No observation. We remove all references to their world from our charts. We pretend they do not exist. That violates 17 fundamental principles of the sovereignty. Better violated principles than an extinct sovereignty. The tentacle creature enlarged the Earth image, focusing on the various nations, the conflicts, the constant striving. Look at them. They are barely more than animals, yet they create wonders and horrors with equal ease. They fight themselves with one hand while reaching for the stars with the other. They do not follow rules. They do not accept limitations. They question everything, challenge everything, break everything. The creature's voice dropped lower. Given enough time, they will surpass us. All of us. And they will not be grateful pupils. They will not respect our ancient wisdom. They will look at everything we have built and ask a simple, terrible question. Why did you stop? The recording ended. The human delegation sat in stunned silence. They knew about us, Priya whispered. All this time they knew. More than knew, Mirith confirmed. They quarantined your entire region of space. Any vessel that approached Earth was quietly redirected. Any species that might have made contact was discouraged. You were kept isolated, contained, and watched. Watched how? Commander Oduya demanded. Probes. Hidden observers. Remote sensors. The sovereignty has monitored your world for nearly 200 years, waiting to see if their fears were justified. Mirith's skin flushed with dark red. They hoped you would destroy yourselves. They expected it. Instead, you survived. You grew, and now you're here, doing exactly what they feared, asking questions they cannot answer. James stood slowly, his mind racing through implications. They're not afraid of our weapons. They're afraid of our ideas. Precisely. Mirith rose as well. The sovereignty maintains power through the myth of inevitability. They claim their way is the only way, that their laws are natural laws, that advancement beyond certain points is impossible. Your existence disproves all of that. What happens now? Felix asked. Now you have a choice. The conservative faction will act soon. They will find a legal justification to condemn your species and order your extermination. Unless we act first, Commander Oduya finished. Mirith nodded. There is a provision in sovereignty law. An ancient right, never invoked because no species has ever been bold enough to claim it. The right of challenge. Any species may demand that their case be judged not by the arbiters, but by the full assembly. Every delegate. Every vote. 14,000 worlds deciding your fate directly. Why would that help us? Dr. Webb asked. Because the conservative faction controls the arbiters, but they do not control the assembly. Many delegates are tired of being ruled. Many remember what they lost when they joined the sovereignty. If you speak to them directly, show them what you showed the arbiters. Remind them what it means to refuse limitations... Mirith's colors swirled with fierce hope. You might just start a revolution. James looked at his team. These 7 people, sent on what was supposed to be a simple test flight, now held the fate of humanity in their hands. One wrong move and Earth would burn. One right move and the entire galaxy might change. How do we invoke this right? He asked. You must speak the words in the Grand Assembly Hall. You must demand your right before witnesses. And you must do it soon, before the arbiters can finalize their plans. Commander Oduya was already checking her tactical display. Security will be heavy. They won't let us just walk in and make demands. You won't need to, Mirith said. Tomorrow is the Festival of Unity, when the Assembly gathers to celebrate the founding of the sovereignty. All species are welcome to attend. All voices are permitted to speak. Their skin glowed with defiant colors. For one day, even the arbiters must listen. James turned to his team once more. Exhausted, outnumbered, millions of light years from home. And yet, not one of them looked afraid. If anything, they looked excited. Well then, he said, allowing himself a small smile. I suppose we'd better prepare a speech. Outside the window, the artificial sun began to set. Emptying the station in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere in the distance, the 7 arbiters were plotting humanity's destruction. They had no idea what was coming. The Festival of Unity transformed the Grand Assembly Hall into something almost beautiful. Lights of 1,000 colors danced through the air, each representing a different member species. Music played from hidden sources, melodies that somehow harmonized, despite coming from cultures that had never shared a single note. For one day each year, the sovereignty pretended to be what it claimed. A family of worlds united in peace. Ambassador James Hartley adjusted his formal jacket as he stood at the entrance with his team. The jacket was borrowed, slightly too large, and decorated with symbols that probably meant something insulting in at least 3 languages. It would have to do. Security is heavier than yesterday, Anton Volkov observed quietly. The security chief had spent the night mapping patrol patterns and identifying weaknesses. They know something is happening. They suspect, James corrected. If they knew, we'd already be in cells. Inside the hall, 14,000 delegates mingled and celebrated. Some drank from cups that adjusted to their biology. Others exchanged gifts according to traditions older than human civilization. A few simply floated in place, observing everything with ancient, patient eyes. The 7 arbiters had not yet arrived. Their entrance would mark the official beginning of the ceremonies, when speeches would be given and unity would be proclaimed. Until then, the gathering was social, informal, and surprisingly accessible. "Remember the plan," Commander Oduya said. "We split up, talk to as many delegates as possible, plant seeds. When James makes his move, we need supporters already prepared." The team dispersed into the crowd, each carrying a modified communication device that would translate their words and let them understand responses. What followed was perhaps the strangest diplomatic mission in human history. Dr. Romano found himself in conversation with a collective intelligence made up of thousands of tiny organisms operating as one mind. They were fascinated by human mathematics, particularly the willingness to work with incomplete information. "You calculate without certainty," the collective marveled, its voice emerging from no particular point. "You theorize without proof. You guess." "We call it intuition," Felix replied. "Sometimes you have to leap before you can see where you'll land. This is madness. We prefer to call it creativity." Nearby, Dr. Webb was speaking with a species of empathic healers who could sense emotions across vast distances. They were troubled by what they felt from the human delegation. "You are afraid," the healer said, their voice gentle. "Yet beneath the fear, there is something else. Something bright. What is this feeling?" Hannah thought for a moment. "Hope. We're afraid, but we're also hopeful. We believe things can be better. To feel both at once. Your minds must be very crowded places. You have no idea." Commander Oduya had targeted the military delegates, species whose forces maintained order throughout the sovereignty. She spoke with a reptilian general whose scales shifted colors to indicate rank. "Your species disabled an imperial fleet without weapons," the general said, clearly torn between respect and suspicion. "How?" "We found a different approach to the problem," Zara replied. "Violence wasn't necessary, so we didn't use it." "But you could have used it." "Yes, we chose not to." "Isn't that the whole point of strength? Having the ability to destroy and choosing to build instead?" The general's scales flickered through several colors before settling on a thoughtful shade of blue. "An interesting philosophy. Not practical for most situations. Maybe. Or maybe you haven't been creative enough about finding alternatives." Samuel had discovered the station's engineering section and was horrifying the local technicians with suggestions for improvements. Priya was deep in conversation with linguistic scholars, trading insights about communication and meaning. Anton maintained a careful watch on security movements, noting the increasing tension as the arbiter's arrival approached. Then the lights dimmed, and a tone sounded through the hall. The 7 arbiters descended from above, their platform lowering through an opening in the ceiling. They appeared in their ceremonial forms, each one radiating power and authority. The first arbiter, Eternal Voice, spread her arms in a gesture of welcome. "Children of the sovereignty," her thought voice rang through every mind. "We gather as we have gathered for 800,000 years to celebrate our unity, our strength, our eternal bond." The assembled delegates offered the expected responses, reciting ancient phrases of loyalty and gratitude. The humans remained silent, standing together now at the edge of the gathering. "This year," Eternal Voice continued, "we have been blessed with a reminder of why the sovereignty exists. A new species has come to our attention, primitive and dangerous, yet full of potential. The humans of Earth have shown us that the universe still holds surprises." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many delegates glanced toward the human delegation with curiosity or concern. "The arbiters have deliberated," Eternal Voice declared. "We have determined that humanity represents a threat to galactic stability. Their technology, their aggression, their unpredictable nature make them unsuitable for membership in our great family. Therefore, we have concluded that Earth must be neutralized. For the good of all, the human threat will be eliminated. The words hit like physical blows. Several delegates gasped. Others nodded in grim approval. The conservative faction had moved faster than anyone expected. James stepped forward, his voice cutting through the shocked silence. I invoke the right of challenge. Every being in the chamber turned toward him. The 7 arbiters froze on their platform, their forms flickering with surprise and anger. You have no right to speak, the 3rd arbiter snarled. You are not a member of this body. The right of challenge exists for all beings brought before the sovereignty, James replied, his voice steady. It was established in the founding charter, written by the first architects. No species can be condemned without the option to be heard by the full assembly. That law has not been invoked in 400,000 years. Then it's long overdue. Eternal Voice descended lower, her form looming over the human ambassador. You would challenge our judgment? Before all these witnesses? You understand that if the assembly rules against you, there will be no appeal? No mercy? James met her gaze without flinching. I understand, and I accept the challenge. The hall erupted into chaos. Delegates argued, shouted, and debated in dozens of languages simultaneously. Security forces moved toward the humans, then stopped when it became clear that touching them would violate the sacred rules of the festival. Finally, Eternal Voice raised her hand for silence. Very well, human. The right of challenge is granted. Speak to the assembly. Make your case. And when you fail, know that your species will pay the price for your arrogance. James nodded, then turned to face the 14,000 delegates who would decide humanity's fate. Thank you for listening, he began. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that humans are harmless. We're not. I'm not going to promise that we'll be easy partners. We won't be. What I am going to do is tell you the truth. Something that's been in short supply around here. He gestured toward the arbiters without looking at them. The beings who rule you decided 200 years ago that humanity was too dangerous to contact. They quarantined our world, hid our existence, and hoped we would destroy ourselves. They didn't warn us about their borders. They didn't offer guidance or friendship. They simply watched, waiting for us to die. Angry murmurs swept through the assembly. We didn't die, James continued. We survived our wars, our diseases, our mistakes. We built something worth having. And when we finally reached for the stars, we found a galaxy that had already written us off. He paused, letting the words sink in. But here's what really frightens your arbiters. It's not our weapons or our technology. It's our questions. We look at your laws and ask why they can't be changed. We look at your limits and ask why they can't be broken. We look at your ancient certainties and ask why they can't be questioned. Priya moved to stand beside him, then Commander Aduya, then the rest of the team. 7 humans facing a galaxy. They told you that some things are impossible, James said, his voice rising. We proved them wrong. They told you that the universe has rules that cannot be bent. We bent them. They told you that new species must submit or be destroyed. We refused. He spread his arms to encompass the entire assembly. How many of you have been told the same things? How many of you have been forced to accept limits you never chose? How many of you remember what you dreamed of before the sovereignty told you to stop dreaming? Silence fell across the hall. Delegates looked at each other, then at the arbiters, then back at the humans. Something was shifting in the air, a feeling that had been suppressed for millennia, finally finding room to breathe. We're not asking you to trust us, James concluded. Trust is earned, and we haven't earned it yet. We're asking you to take a chance. Vote against our destruction. Give us the opportunity to prove that different doesn't mean dangerous. Let us show you what happens when you stop being afraid of new ideas. He lowered his arms. Or vote to kill us. Destroy our world. Eliminate our species. But know that if you do, you'll be proving that the sovereignty isn't a family. It's a prison. And you'll have to live with that truth forever. The first arbiter's form blazed with fury. Enough. The assembly will vote. All in favor of humanity's condemnation, signal now. Lights began to appear across the chamber, delegates registering their support for destruction. Hundreds of them. Thousands. James felt his heart sink as the numbers climbed. Then, slowly, other lights began to appear. Different colors. Votes against condemnation. Mirith was first, their amphibian form glowing with defiant pride. Then the empathic healers. Then the reptilian general, whose scales had shifted to a decisive shade of green. More and more delegates added their lights. Species who had suffered in silence now finding their voice. The voting continued for several minutes. When it finally ended, the tally appeared in the air above the assembly. In favor of condemnation, 5,847 worlds. Against condemnation, 8,153 worlds. The humans had won. Eternal. Voice stared at the numbers as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. For the first time in 800,000 years, the arbiters had been overruled. This isn't over, she hissed, her thought voice raw with rage. You may have survived today, but the sovereignty will not forget this insult. James smiled, exhaustion and relief flooding through him. We're counting on it. In the galleries above, delegates from dozens of species began to applaud. A sound that echoed through the ancient hall like thunder. Revolution had begun. 6 months had passed since the Festival of Unity. 6 months of quiet diplomacy, careful alliances, and growing tension. The galaxy had not returned to normal because normal no longer existed. Admiral Rebecca Stone stood on the bridge of Earth's flagship, the carrier Defiance, watching the tactical display with careful eyes. Around her, a fleet of 60 human vessels held position at the edge of what diplomats now called the neutral zone, a buffer region established by the reformed assembly to give humanity breathing room. The assembly's vote had changed everything and nothing. Humanity was officially recognized as a sovereign species, no longer subject to termination orders. But the arbiters had not accepted defeat gracefully. In the months since, a shadow war had begun. Covert operations. Sabotage. Assassination attempts that failed only because humans apparently slept with one eye open and booby-trapped their quarters out of habit. The conservative faction was determined to prove that humanity was too dangerous to tolerate, even if they had to manufacture the evidence themselves. Contact bearing 72 Mark V, Operations Officer Lieutenant Torres announced. 3 vessels, Imperial configuration. They're running without identification codes. Admiral Stone nodded. Hail them. The response came not in words, but in weapons fire. 3 bolts of energy slammed into the Defiance's shields, which held without difficulty. Return fire? Torres asked. No. Disable their engines and weapons, nothing more. The human fleet moved with precision that still startled their galactic observers. Within minutes, all 3 attacking vessels drifted powerless, their crews alive, but unable to continue the fight. Send a message to the assembly, Admiral Stone ordered. Another unprovoked attack by unmarked Imperial vessels. Request an immediate investigation. It was the 14th such incident this month. The arbiters would claim ignorance. The investigation would find nothing conclusive, and everyone would know the truth without being able to prove it. Back on the Sovereignty's capital station, Ambassador Hartley was facing a different kind of battle. The Reformed Assembly had granted humanity a seat among the delegates, making them the youngest species ever to achieve full membership. But membership came with obligations, complications, and enemies. They're blocking our trade agreements again, Priya reported, scrolling through diplomatic communications. The Crystalline Consortium claims our goods don't meet safety standards. The same consortium that sells antimatter containers with known containment flaws? James asked. The very same. 6 months of this. Small obstacles. Bureaucratic delays. Social snubs at diplomatic functions. The conservative faction couldn't destroy humanity openly, so they were trying to strangle them slowly. But something else was happening too. Something the Arbiters hadn't anticipated. Commander Oduya entered James's office with a secure tablet. The underground network has expanded again. 12 more species have made contact. They want to know if we can help them. The network had started accidentally. After the festival speech, delegates began reaching out to the human delegation, sharing stories of oppression and asking questions about resistance. What began as informal conversations had grown into something larger. Help them how? James asked. Different things. Some want technology. Others want training. A few just want to know they're not alone. Zara set down the tablet. James, these species have been suffering for thousands of years. The sovereignty promised them protection and gave them chains instead. Our victory showed them change is possible. We can't fight a war on behalf of the entire galaxy. We're not talking about war. We're talking about education. Teaching them what we know. Sharing ideas. She paused. Remember what you said at the festival? About questions being more dangerous than weapons? This is what you meant. We don't have to destroy the sovereignty. We just have to help people realize they don't need it. Before James could respond, an emergency alarm blared through the station. Dr. Romano burst through the door moments later, his face pale. They've done it. The Arbiters have actually done it. Done what? Felix pulled up a display showing a region of space near the galactic core. At its center was Earth, a small blue dot, surrounded by the familiar planets of the solar system. And surrounding the entire system was a massive energy barrier, a wall of force that nothing could penetrate. They've quarantined us. Full containment shield. No ships in or out. No communications. Earth is completely cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Can they do that? Zara demanded. The assembly voted to recognize us. Technically, the quarantine predates our recognition. They're claiming it was never officially lifted, just temporarily suspended. Since the Arbiters control the technical infrastructure, they simply reactivated it. James stared at the display, watching the barrier shimmer around his homeworld. 8 billion people, trapped. Every friend and family member, every city and memory, sealed away behind a wall of alien technology. How do we break through? Felix shook his head. The barrier is powered by stations placed throughout the system during the original quarantine. Hundreds of them. To shut it down, we'd need to disable them all simultaneously. From inside the barrier. Then we need to get inside. James, the barrier blocks everything. Matter, energy, quantum tunneling. Nothing we have can penetrate it. Then we need to find something that can. The next weeks were desperate ones. The human delegation worked around the clock, reaching out to allies, gathering information, searching for any weakness in the barrier. Meanwhile, the Arbiters presented their action to the Assembly as a temporary security measure, a precaution while investigations into human aggression continued. Many delegates protested. The vote at the festival had made humanity's position clear. But the Arbiters controlled the infrastructure, and without the ability to physically challenge their technical dominance, protests meant nothing. It was Mirith who finally brought hope. The amphibian delegate arrived at the human quarters late one night, their skin cycling through nervous colors. I have found something. In the ancient archives, A record of the original quarantine. We've seen those records, James said wearily. Not all of them. The Arbiters kept certain files classified, even from other archivists. But I have. Friends in useful places. Mirith produced a data crystal. The barrier technology was not invented by the sovereignty. It was inherited from the first architects. The first architects were legendary, beings who had supposedly created the foundations of galactic civilization before disappearing millions of years ago. Most species considered them mythological. According to these records, the architects didn't just build the barrier. They built a backdoor, a way to bypass it in case of emergency. Mirith's colors shifted to an excited gold. The bypass still exists, but it requires activation from 2 points, one outside the barrier, one inside. How do we activate it from inside if nothing can get through? That's the clever part. The bypass uses an older form of communication, something the architects developed before they created the barrier. It's called resonance transmission. It works through dimensions, not through space. The barrier doesn't block it, because the barrier was built after the transmission method was established. Felix leaned forward with sudden interest. You're saying there's a way to communicate with Earth despite the barrier? More than communicate. The resonance transmission can carry instructions. If you can reach someone on Earth, tell them how to activate the internal bypass point. The barrier will fall. James felt hope surge through him for the first time in weeks. Where is the external activation point? Mirith hesitated. That's the problem. It's on the Arby. Terzone Station, in the heart of their power, the most heavily guarded location in the galaxy. Commander Oduya smiled, a dangerous expression that had preceded several improbable victories. Then we'll need a distraction. The plan came together over the following days. Human engineers worked with sympathetic alien technicians to construct a resonance transmitter. Priya spent hours teaching herself the architect's communication protocols. Samuel identified structural weaknesses in the Arbiter station that could be exploited, and throughout the galaxy, the underground network prepared to act out when the moment came. It happened all at once. On 100 worlds, species that had accepted sovereignty rule for millennia suddenly found their voices. Protests erupted. Systems malfunctioned. Bureaucracies ground to a halt as workers simply stopped cooperating. The Arbiters were overwhelmed. For the first time in their long existence, they faced resistance on a galactic-scale dot in the chaos. A small team of humans slipped through the station's defenses. James, Zara, Felix, and Anton moved through maintenance corridors, guided by maps provided by Mirith's contacts. Security patrols rushed past them, responding to crises that multiplied faster than they could be contained. The activation chamber was deep within the station, protected by locks that had not been opened in 200,000 years. Anton placed charges while Felix worked on the door's ancient circuitry. Movement in the corridor, Anton reported. We've got about 3 minutes. The door opened with a sound like sighing. Inside, a single pedestal held a device that looked almost organic, curves and spirals that seemed to move even while standing still. Felix approached it reverently. This is architect technology. Real architect technology. It's beautiful. Can you activate it? James asked. I think so. The instructions were clear. I just need to. Energy blasts filled the corridor behind them. Anton returned fire while Zara dragged Felix toward the device. Do it now. Felix placed his hands on the architect device. Light flowed from the pedestal, through his fingers, and into something that existed outside normal space. Somewhere far away, a complementary device responded, on Earth, in a chamber buried deep beneath the mountains of Tibet, an artifact that humans had discovered decades ago and never understood suddenly came to life. Dr. Helena Vasquez. The scientist, who had devoted her career to studying the strange object, watched in amazement as it began to pulse with inner light. A voice emerged from the artifact, speaking in a language that should have been impossible to understand, yet somehow made perfect sense. Bypass authorization received. Quarantine barrier deactivating. In space, the massive energy wall surrounding the solar system flickered once, twice, then dissolved like morning mist. Earth was free. On the Arbiter station, alarms screamed as the barrier's fall registered on every sensor. The 7 Arbiters themselves appeared in the activation chamber, their forms blazing with fury. "What have you done?" Eternal voice demanded. James turned to face them, exhausted but triumphant. "We asked for help, and someone answered." Before the Arbiters could respond, a new light filled the chamber. The architect device was still active, and something was coming through it. Something vast and ancient, and utterly beyond mortal comprehension. A voice spoke, not in thought or sound, but in pure meaning. "Children of this galaxy, we have been watching, and we are very disappointed." The first architects had returned, and they wanted to talk about what had become of their creation. The presence that filled the activation chamber defied description. It was not light, though it glowed. It was not sound, though it resonated. The closest human concept was awareness itself, given form and purpose and ancient, terrible patience. The 7 Arbiters, beings who had ruled the galaxy for 800,000 years, dropped to their knees. Even Eternal Voice, whose pride had never bowed to anyone, trembled before the returning architects. James Hartley stood his ground, though his legs threatened to give way. Beside him, his team faced the impossible with the same stubborn refusal to surrender that had brought them this far. "You are the ones called human," the architect presence said. Its voice existed in every mind simultaneously, carrying meaning beyond mere words. "You activated the old systems. You called across the void." "We didn't know you would answer," James admitted. "We just needed to reach our home. Yet here we are." The presence shifted, somehow focusing its attention more directly on the humans. "We have watched your species for some time. Curious creatures. So young, yet so insistent. You refuse to accept boundaries that have stood for millions of years. Boundaries exist to be questioned," Dr. Romano said, surprising himself with his own boldness. The architect made a sound that might have been laughter. "Yes, we thought something similar once. Before we built this." The presence gestured, and suddenly everyone in the chamber could see the galaxy as the architect saw it. A vast web of connections, systems, and safeguards, all designed to promote stability, growth, and peace. "We created the framework for civilization," the architect explained. "Rules to prevent destruction, structures to enable cooperation. We meant for it to evolve, to grow, to adapt as new species joined the community." The vision shifted, showing the rise of the sovereignty, the establishment of the arbiters, the slow accumulation of power. But evolution requires change, and change requires risk. Our successors chose safety over growth. They transformed our framework into a cage. The presence turned toward the kneeling arbiters. "You were meant to guide, not to rule. To teach, not to control. To prepare species for greatness, not to crush greatness before it could bloom." Eternal Voice raised her head, defiance flickering in her ancient eyes. "We preserved stability. We prevented wars that would have destroyed millions of worlds. You prevented growth that would have elevated billions." The architect's response was gentle but final. "A garden that fears new seeds will eventually become a desert. You have tended this garden for too long without letting anything new take root." The presence turned back to the humans. "And then these young ones arrived, breaking rules you never explained, questioning limits you claimed were natural, accomplishing impossibilities that you had declared forbidden. Something like warmth entered the architect's voice. They reminded us why we created this framework in the first place. Not to maintain what exists, but to enable what could be. James stepped forward. What happens now? Now, a choice must be made. Not by us. By all of you? The architect's presence expanded, reaching beyond the chamber, beyond the station, touching every mind in the galaxy. We will speak to all our children one last time. Across 12,000 worlds, beings of every shape and nature paused in whatever they were doing as a voice spoke directly to their consciousness. We are the architects. We built the foundations of your civilizations and then departed, trusting you to build upon what we created. We were wrong to leave without guidance. We were wrong to assume you would understand our intentions. We were wrong about many things. The voice carried no judgment, only acknowledgement. The sovereignty was meant to unite you, not to control you. The rules we established were meant to protect you while you grew, not to prevent growth entirely. Somewhere along the way, protection became oppression, and unity became conformity. Images flashed through the galactic consciousness. Species that had been suppressed. Technologies that had been forbidden. Ideas that had been silenced. Millions of years of potential, lost to fear. Today, we offer you a choice. You may continue as you have, maintaining the old systems under the old rules. Or you may begin again, not without structure, not without cooperation, but with a new understanding of what civilization can be. The presence began to fade, its energy dispersing back into whatever realm the architects called home. We will not force this choice upon you. We will not return to rule what we once built. But we will offer one gift before we go. Light gathered around the human delegation, and suddenly James understood something that had been hidden from him until that moment. The architect device on Earth, the backdoor in the barrier, the resonance transmission that connected across dimensions. We placed seeds throughout the galaxy, the architect revealed, on worlds that seemed promising. Most never grew, but one did. Your species, human, carries a fragment of our legacy within your minds. Not power, not knowledge, simply the inability to accept that anything is impossible. The light faded, the presence withdrew, and then the architects were gone, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed. 1 year later, the Grand Assembly Hall had been transformed. Where once a handful of arbiters had sat in judgment, now a vast council table stretched across the floor, with seats for every member species equally arranged. No thrones, no platforms, just representatives facing each other as partners. James Hartley, now officially titled humanity's first voice to the council, took his seat among the delegates. Across the table sat Nerith, representing a reformed Visari collective. Nearby, the reptilian general who had shifted his loyalty at the festival now commanded the new Galactic Security Force. Even a few former arbiter loyalists had accepted positions in the restructured government. Their expertise valued, even as their authority was limited. Eternal Voice herself had chosen exile, departing for the far reaches of the universe with a small group of followers. Some said she was searching for the architects. Others claimed she simply couldn't bear to watch the world she had built be rebuilt by others. Whatever her reasons, she was gone, and the galaxy was learning to function without her guidance. The session began with reports from across the stars. Trade routes were reopening. Quarantined species were being reintegrated. Technologies that had been suppressed for millennia were being studied again, with proper safeguards, but without arbitrary prohibitions. Problems remained. Factions still resisted change. Old hatreds didn't disappear simply because a new government formed. But for the first time in 800,000 years, the galaxy was moving forward instead of standing still. After the formal session ended, James found himself on a balcony overlooking the station's central plaza. Below, beings from hundreds of species mingled freely, many interacting for the first time in their civilization's histories. Commander Oduya joined him, 2 drinks in hand. Quite a view, quite a year. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the impossible become ordinary. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Zara asked eventually. "Shaking everything up like this. Some species were happy with the old ways. Some people are always happy with the old ways. That doesn't mean the old ways were right." James took a sip of his drink, which tasted like nothing on Earth and everything good in the universe. "We didn't destroy the sovereignty. We just asked questions. The galaxy did the rest. The architects helped. They gave us a push. A big push. But we were already moving." He gestured toward the plaza below. "Look at them. A year ago, half those species had never met. Now they're sharing meals, trading stories, making plans. That didn't happen because some ancient beings told them to. It happened because someone showed them it was possible." A notification chimed on Zara's tablet. She glanced at it and smiled. "Message from Earth. The new FTL vessels are ready for their test flights. They want to know if Ambassador Hartley would like to participate in the inaugural ceremony." James laughed. "Ambassador? I still can't get used to that. Would you rather go back to being a test pilot?" "Some days." He looked up at the artificial sky, where a viewport showed real stars shining in the infinite darkness. "But then I remember what we're building here. A galaxy where species don't have to be afraid of new ideas. Where questions are welcomed instead of punished. Where even a young species from a small blue world can stand beside ancient civilizations as equals." He finished his drink and set down the glass. "No, I think I'll stay in this job a while longer. We've got a lot of work to do. Back on Earth, in a laboratory that had been constructed specifically for this purpose, Samuel and Felix were putting finishing touches on humanity's latest contribution to galactic science. It was called the Bridge, a network of transmission points that would allow instantaneous communication between any 2 locations in the universe. "The old sovereignty would have killed us for developing this," Felix observed. "The old sovereignty would have killed us for a lot of things," Samuel replied. "Hand me that calibrator." Above them, through the observatory dome, stars wheeled slowly across the night sky. Somewhere out there, civilizations that had been silent for millennia were finding their voices again. Somewhere out there, the future was being written by those who refused to accept that it was already complete. And somewhere, in a quiet office on the Sovereignty Station, Priya Malhotra was translating a message that had just arrived from a previously unknown region of space. A new species making first contact, asking the same question humanity had asked less than 2 years before. "Is anyone out there?" She smiled and began composing a response. "Yes, we're here. And we've been waiting for you." The universe had once been a place of fixed borders and absolute rules. Now it was something else entirely. A frontier, vast and unknown, full of dangers and wonders in equal measure. Humanity had stumbled into the galactic order by accident. They had refused to tremble. They had asked uncomfortable questions and demanded honest answers. And in doing so, they had changed everything not bad for a species that had learned to fly less than 4 centuries ago. Not bad at all.